A very good afternoon to you all, friends. I'm Sanjeev Singhal, Central Council member and Chairman Auditing and Assurance Standard Board and Chairman Sustainability Reporting Standard Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. On behalf of ICAI, AASB, my own behalf, and on behalf of my worthy Vice Chairman, CA Vishal Doshi ji in absentia, I welcome you to this 78th program for this council year for the Auditing Standard Board. Friends, this year we have taken a mission to take the learning of auditing standard at the doorstep of every member. And in this series, this is yet another program. So far, 93,000 members have attended these programs. And we have organized programs on every possible topic, every auditing standards, Schedule 3, CARO, specialized topics. And today's topic is yet another very, very important topic, SQC 1. Friends, this year we have also started an expert panel on the queries relating to auditing matters while doing the audit of company as well as non-corporate entities. We have constituted an expert panel of 50 members who are answering the queries of our members which they are encountering while doing their attest function. And apart from that, many initiatives are in progress. And for this topic, we have invited a very young and a very knowledgeable speaker, CA Shraddha Kipsara. Shraddha has 12 years of post-qualification experience, and she has done audits of large listed group companies, which are part of Sensex 30 and Nifty 50. She has also led India's implementation in some of the leading companies. And she's a passionate trainer. She's also a company secretary and an MCom from University of Pune and BCom from University of Pune. We welcome you, Shraddha, and thanks for taking out time. And it's indeed a pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for the day, my brother in the council, CA Dayaneva Sharma ji. We entered into the council in the same council year in the 24th council. And last 3.5 years, we've been working together. Currently is holding the fort for one of the most important board of studies, academics, and the new scheme of education and training. He is the pilot for that. And very soon you will have the new scheme of education and training, which is totally refreshing. And, as students and members alike, you would like this. He's also steering the technology initiative of the Institute. And he has been the chairman of the peer review board. He himself is an information system auditor and a certified forensic auditor. He has contributed immensely. If I go on speaking, probably I'll speak for 1 hour for Daya Bhai, as I call him. Comes from Hyderabad, comes from a very illustrious family, an illustrious son of an illustrious father. His father, Lakshmi Nivas Sharma ji, was also a Central Council member. And he's also leading the Center of Excellence, Hyderabad. And he's a member of 11 technical committees and 10 non-technical committees. He's also a member of Federation of Telangana Chamber of Commerce and Industries, Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, TAI Hyderabad, and CEO CFO Forum Hyderabad. Very, very dynamic personality and very proactive. He's also leading this SQC1 initiative for the Auditing Standard Board. He has a passion for audit. He's also been covered by a coffee table book and recognized as Young India Visionary by IMG Innovative Media Group in whole of UAE. And he continues to deliver lectures, of course, throughout the length and breadth of the country as well as overseas. And he's a speaker who speaks on diversified topics. So thank you, Dayabai. This is a very brief introduction. Whatever I could squeeze in, whatever I could reduce, I have reduced. My apologies for curtailing it down, since this was your advice to keep it brief. And I welcome you to the audit. This is your board. And he has contributed immensely into the sustainability board also in the last 2 years and this year as well. So thereby, screen is all yours, and I would request for your keynote address.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sanjeev Bhai. It's indeed a pleasure to come and give a keynote address in AASB, which is, I always say AASB is the mother of entire accounting profession. And there cannot be a better person than you who is chairing this board. Really delighted to know that 78 lectures during this council year, which is like only 6 months completed, with 93,000 people participating, is a huge number, I can tell you. I really compliment you. And I also request you, because I come from a board of studies. Board of studies is one place, whether you like it or not, you need to read all the material. So one advantage as well as a pain is there. But one thing we can do is, from board of studies, we can surely do something together to ensure that the new generation chartered accountants, the new breed which is going to come into the profession, they are geared up to the new technology as well as the auditing requirements, which is coming in a big way. And with this 93,000, I think with the students adding, it will be some more zeros to be added to this, which can be effectively done. Compliments to you with the kind of passion you have been continuously doing. Your office has been really taking a real positive effort to ensure that in true sense, auditing assurance board reaches out to doorstep of chartered accountants, whether in practice, whether in industry, makes whole lot of difference. Compliments to you. And your vice chairman, Vishal Doshi, who happens to be my vice chairman also in board of studies. So I can understand, and his value contribution has been huge, I think, in both the boards in true sense. And having Shraddha today to talk on one of the most important topics, SQC1, which ultimately is the heart of my thought process also. Being a chairman of a peer review board for 2 years, I always used to say why peer review board is independent of AASB. It should be forming part of AASB because they can only guide them very effectively. Shraddha, one thing I can tell you, whether you spoke on this topic or not, but I think you need to go and tell each and every person who's listening to this forum or might be going to listen a recorded lecture at a later point in time. SQC1, which is Standard on Quality Control, whatever practice size you operate in, whether it is a proprietary or an individual or to a 200 partner firm, SQC1 just applies as it is. Not only SQC1, all the auditing standards apply to every chartered accountant who is putting pen paper together. So friends, don't think that the standard on auditing or the SQC is actually independent or might be applicable to a large certificate which you are going to issue in capacity of a word called CA with your membership number or FR. And most importantly, which I have been noticing, and last year and last to last year, we have done a lot of training program on peer review. And very happy to say that for the first time, we introduced the concept where examination assessment test has been introduced, where we are focusing all the auditing standards and SQC as the core subject. And people, let me just share with you, because people have shared with me, Sanjeev bhai, that they failed twice, thrice to attempt that examination, but they were very happy to go back and read the entire standard on auditing. Rather, you made their life simple who are going to take their assessment test in time to come with after completing the 78 plus sessions which you are going to continue to make it. I think everyone is going to get the DNA right, which we always tell people, look, it is not only examination passing of auditing, but once you become a chartered accountant, you are actually a chartered accountant in true sense, and there is no excuse for that. Today, the topic which is there is SQC1 and EQCR. EQCR, which I would like to say is, engagement quality control review. First, I'll take up that one because it is a subset of SQC1. EQCR can be done by two people. One is within the firm, it can be done, or you are a proprietary concern, or you might be two partner, you might be three partner, but they are not having that exposure. Institute of Chartered Accountants of India under SQC1 has given that power for you to appoint any person who is doing that job under the entire confidentiality clause, that a person who is an expert in auditing subject or assurance subject, they can actually come, do a complete review of your file and give their comments. Please understand, it is not a policing activity. It is an hand-holding activity. Before you get exposed to external regulator, it is always worth to have an internal person, your peer, to come, sit with you, understand, make you understand what the gaps have been noted in the entire process. And then that gaps can be actually written down effectively, controlled effectively, and be ready for all the external regulators to come and do a review. So please understand, EQCR is for your own good. It is for all your own good. Whichever complex entities which you are auditing or an engagement which you are certified, you need to ensure that an expert from external side comes, reviews the entire file, and tells you these are the gaps, kindly ensure it has been updated. Now, what is EQCR and what is the role which is defined in SQC1? SQC1 primarily talks about the entire, rather I always say SQC is the mother of the entire auditing profession when you are doing practice. When you are doing practice, because it talks not only about technical aspects, it doesn't even not only talks about accounting standard, it not only talks about how you need to conduct, comply with ethical requirement, but also it talks about how the documentation have to be there, how you are maintaining your people, are you focusing on training your staff, are you ensuring the quality of your partner, qualified, and articles when they are getting engaged for an assignment are really being trained well, are they being taken into a true spirit. So now the point is SQC1 was mandated. We introduced peer review process in the year 2000, and only in 2022 we actually made it 21. We made it compulsory. Before this, SEBI has made it compulsory that all the firms which are going to do audit or engagement for a listed entity should be a peer review firm. And we had that portion which was very clearly defined by an external body. We should be happy that the council has taken a decision that in the 4-phase review, our entire process has to be implemented. That means a firm which is going to do a branch audit, of a bank or a public sector undertaking will be required to have a peer review certificate. If you require a peer review certificate, your compliance for SQC1 becomes compulsory. And in the SQC1, there are 6 elements which are being talked about. Well, let me just read it out and conclude my discussion. One is the leadership responsibility for quality within the firm. Just imagine all the partners are going to get tested in the process, including the qualified. Number 2, ethical requirements. Ethical, I think when you are a chartered accountant, the only word which will come before CA also is ethics. When you follow ethics, then the 2-letter word CA will come into a play. And now there are a lot of new pronouncements which are being done by Ethical Standard Board, which we need to be really careful of to comply, basically including your advertising guideline. Then the third part is acceptance and continuous of client relationship and specific engagement. Please understand, today by just reaching out to Google Bhagwan, we are actually able to pull out all the client data related issues which are there. If there is any cases which are happening in any of the courts, that is also can be noted down. So your acceptance and continuance should be done every year. Those days are over where we used to take a comfort saying that client is known to me because I am doing audit from last 3 generations. Now, under rotation, we are actually changing. Auditors are changing. That mentality is changing of a promoter. We need to ensure the acceptance and continuous is going in true spirit. Then the human resource, which is the key of any audit profession. All promoting a shortage of people, but the scope of audit, the scope of compliance is increasing day by day. When an opportunity is growing, unfortunately, size of people is reducing. So your human resource is going to be one of the most crucial part in your entire practice setup. Then the engagement performance that need to be reviewed year on year. from your internal perspective or external perspective, whether you like it or not, you need to ensure that the review is happening on a continuous basis. And the last part is on the monitoring mechanism. Today, when you talk about monitoring mechanism, it is not only on the physical files, but also all your data which is available on your laptops about your clients. Now, the fact is the cyber threats which are actually creating lot of issues system, lot of client data is available on your systems, whether they are protected, how your staff is maintaining, whether you have a right set of infrastructure architecture in your office or not. This monitoring also is crucial part of your engagement to keep the data privacy to the last level so that data of your client doesn't get leaked. So monitoring of engagement is one part, but monitoring of your entire firm also is becoming critical. So friends, which I would like to tell you in sum total, don't miss out on SQC1. It is actually going to be the biggest shield of your practice when you unfortunately will get questioned on your credibility and on your honesty in the entire process. What can demonstrate your honesty, sincerity, and trueness to the profession is only your documentation, not your words saying that I have been honest all throughout, kindly consider me. No, papers have to speak sometime that in good intent you have done your job right. So today's discussion with regards to SQC1 and EQCR is going to be focusing on all these aspects, that how do you protect the entire ecosystem of your firm in true spirit. With this, I hope whatever expectation my chairman had, I have covered in all sense, and I could actually give certain information to Shraddha also to ensure that it has been taken in true spirit. Thank you, Sanjeev Bhai. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Unmute.
Thank you, Debai. You very aptly summarize the importance of EQCR and the key elements of SQC1, the 6 elements. And as far as Board of Studies and AASB is concerned, you're very right that we work together. And these 78 programs faculty can also be, utilized to develop the study material for the new course for auditing, whether at intermediate level or at final level. So thank you so much for your keynote address. And with this, now I will request our technical speaker for the day, C.A. Shraddha Kivsara, to kindly take our members through SQC1 and EQCR. Over to you, Shraddha.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sanjeev Bhai.
Sanjeev. Yeah. Thank you, sir. I'll just share my screen. Yeah. Okay. Good evening to all my dear friends. I think the keynote speaker has very well summarized what is SQC1 all about and the role of EQCR. I think the importance of SQC1 is immense, and that's the reason today we are talking about this topic on standard on quality control 1. So basically, most of you would be thinking, what is the reason for having a standard specifically dedicated? What is the purpose of this standard to which is dedicated towards the quality control of the firm? So basically, SQC1, which is the quality control standard, the purpose is that the firm needs to have a standard and a guidance in place wherein a system of quality control would be inbuilt around it. So this standard, which came long back around 2009 when it was made mandatory, it requires the firms to have a quality control system in place for audit and review of historical financial information and other assurance related engagements. So basically, my dear friends, this is applicable to all the practitioners, be it sole proprietary, be it a partnership firm. It is applicable to all the practitioners, whatever small practice it would be. If they are providing any audit review or any other non-assurance service engagements, SQC1 is required and SQC1 governs those engagements. Now, what is the objective of SQC1? The objective of SQC1 to have a quality control framework in place wherein the firm and the people working in the firm would comply with those professional and regulatory and legal requirements or the legal standard, and the reports which would be issued. Ultimately, what is the extreme importance is the report which goes to the stakeholders. So the report issued by the firm or the engagement partner has to be appropriate in the circumstances, and that's the reason that it becomes very important that a quality control framework governs the reporting which is done by a firm or an engagement partner. uh, Again, there was a lot of summary of the six elements of SQC. The importance of these six elements cannot be, I would say, cannot be denied. These six elements are the core heart of the SQC framework, which has been defined by this standard. So it starts with leadership responsibilities. So it is always said that the tone at the top determines how the firm would be performing or how a business would be performing. Similarly, the tone of the leaders of the firm would decide where the firm's outlook would be. So, leadership responsibility has been given a significant importance under SQC. Next important element is around ethical requirements. Again, ethics, there is a separate code of conduct on ethics. There's a lot of importance and emphasis on independence. There's a separate guidance note of ICI on independence. So ethical and independence requirements are of paramount importance from a professional perspective, and therefore it forms an element of SQC. Next important element is client acceptance and continuance. So the clients which are accepted by the firm, the process which is followed to accept a client relationship, that is again very, very important, and that forms a part of the client acceptance and continuance process. Next important element is around human resources. Again, I think there was a lot of emphasis by the keynote speaker around human resources. So we know that we are in a profession where professionals are everything for us. So professionals are the asset for a firm, and therefore human resources become very, very important. So the process which is followed for hiring right talent, retaining that, training that talent, career development, career progression of those people, right messages being given to those people, the way the compensation structure of firm operates, etc., is very, very important, and that is again one of the key and a critical element of SQC. Next important element is around engagement performance. So ultimately, what we saw in the earlier slide, ultimately the report which goes to the stakeholders has to be appropriate in the circumstances. Therefore, the engagement and its performance is very, very critical when it comes to the SQC requirements, and therefore engagement performance is given a lot of importance. Next critical topic is, or the next critical element is around monitoring. So monitoring is again very, very important. Monitoring of the firm, monitoring done by the firm to see how the process is operating or how the quality control framework is operating, monitoring of its resources. That is again a very critical part and element of SQC. So I think these are six elements of SQC. Now we will just look at what does the SQC standard requires. The SQC standard says that the quality control policies and procedures should be documented. It should not only be documented but communicated also to all the firm personnel. So there should be a clear cut communication by the firm to all the required personnel to say there is a quality control policy and procedure in place, and what are the objective which firm is trying to achieve by having those quality controls in place, and all people who are responsible to comply with it, and what are they expected to comply with. So basically, firm need to first have documentation of those policies and procedures, and then communicate that to the appropriate firm personnel. People need to be very clear what are they required to comply with and who all are required to comply with. Another important aspect is firm should be very open to obtain feedback. So the quality control standard talks about firm being appreciative and open to take the feedback and make sure that it relooks at its quality control system, and in case required it does some amendments to it basis the feedback which is obtained from the personnel. So there are three important aspects: documentation, of those policies and procedures, communication to all the required personnel, and obtaining feedback wherever required. So again, obtaining feedback becomes very, very critical, so that the quality control framework of the firm keeps on upgrading as and when people believe there is a need to, or there is a lot of scope for improvement. Let's now look at the first element of SQC, leadership responsibilities for quality control. So, as we mentioned, the tone of the top determines how the organization would function. Similarly, quality control framework, the first element is leadership responsibility. So, the quality control framework says that the firm should have policies and procedures in place. So, they should have the policy and procedure, they should launch and implement and communicate those policies and procedures, and it also makes the managing partner or CEO of the firm responsible for the ultimate responsibility of quality control framework. So the leadership is completely responsible to ensure the compliance of the quality control framework. So it says, how would leadership do that? Leadership in its all communications, through training, through webinars, as and when there are messages which are passed on to the personnel, it is very, very important that the right culture and the culture promoting quality is always talked about. Firms should also promote high quality oriented internal control. It can be done in various manners. So, as and when compensation is due for revision, people appraisals are looked into. Quality should be of paramount importance when a performance of an individual is assessed. Not only of an individual, even when a partner's performance is assessed, the standard talks about quality being given utmost importance when the appraisals are done. So what happens is that does set a tone to say quality is extremely important from a firm's perspective, and people have more focus towards ensuring the quality of the engagement or quality of the work which is performed. So basically, the leaders of the firm are responsible or have to assume the ultimate responsibility of quality control framework. They need to designate appropriate people who will ensure that the quality control framework operates appropriately in the organization. There are policies in place, those are communicated, those are looked into. So that needs to be done by the leadership, and the leadership needs to ensure high quality oriented internal culture within the firm. So uh, leadership should recognize and reward high quality work. Leadership can do that through communication, training, performance appraisals. Leadership needs to demonstrate that quality precedes business objective. What does that mean? It says that quality is more important than achieving a business objective. So business objectives will not be achieved at the compromise of quality. So commitment to quality needs to be demonstrated by the leadership firm. They need to assign management responsibility to appropriate people. So when, what do you mean by an appropriate people? So basically, people who are responsible for overlooking the quality framework needs to be capable and should also have authority for compliance. They should be aware about the requirements, they should be competent enough, and they should have authority. They should have authority to ensure that people abide by it. They should be able to ensure that. So that authority also needs to be there. The HR policies which are formed in an organization should also need to demonstrate the organization's commitment towards quality framework, the firm's commitment towards quality framework. Also, leaders need to ensure that sufficient resources for development, documentation, and support of QC policies are given, so that QC becomes an important aspect for the people, for the betterment of the firm. So QC policies should be given priority. People, there should be resources, time, which should be I would say devoted towards ensuring that the quality framework of an organization is operating appropriately. That is what is the ask from the leadership responsibilities from the by the SQC one. Let's look at the second element of SQC. The second element of SQC, which is again one of the most critical element, is around ethical requirements. So when we talk about the ethical requirements, all of us are aware that we are governed by code of ethics, which is issued by ICI. Again, when it comes up, when we talk about ethics, not only ethics but independence also plays a very, very critical role in this. And therefore, in the standard, if you see, independence is also given a lot of importance along with the ethical requirements. If we look at the fundamental ethical principles, So it says firm needs to have the policies and procedures to ensure that the firm along with its people comply with the ethical requirements. So what are the ethical requirements, or what are the fundamental ethical principles? Those fundamental ethical principles are integrity, objectivity, professional competence, professional behavior, and confidentiality. So these are the five critical fundamental ethical principles which people need to, or personnel need to comply with. They need to work with integrity, they need to be professionally competent, need to demonstrate professional behavior, need to keep the confidentiality of the firm as well as client data, and need to be objective in their behavior. So these are the ethical principles which needs to be re-emphasized and reinforced by the leadership. So basically these ethical principle needs to be re-emphasized again and again and reinforced to the firm personnel by leadership messaging, by education and training, by monitoring process, and there had need to be a process to deal with the non-compliance if any. So in case any personnel non-complies with the ethical requirement, there needs to be a process to deal with it, and there could be disciplinary actions. So non-compliance of ethical requirements should be a no-no, and strict action should be taken against it, so that people would, and the firm personnel would focus on ensuring that ethical requirements are met with. Other than ethical requirements, again, independence becomes very important. Now, the quality control standard says that firm needs to have policies and procedures to ensure that the firm personnel are independent, they maintain their independence, and the firm also has a procedure to note the breaches of independence and resolve the matters. So it says maintenance of independence is extremely critical, and dealing with breaches, if any, of independence requirements. Again, that is the process which needs to be documented under the quality control framework and needs to be followed by the firm to ensure that independent policies and procedures are followed. So in independent policies and procedures, the policy and procedures should be developed to enable people to communicate their independent requirement, to identify and evaluate the circumstances which may lead to breach of independence. So basically, independence first, people should be informed about what is independence all about. When those circumstances arise, or what are the circumstances in which there could be a threat to their independence, how they should deal with those circumstances, how they should reduce their risk, whom should they inform, how should they eliminate the risk of independence. There could be scenarios where there could be a withdrawal from an engagement just to ensure that independence is not breached, and what are the resolution of breaches of independence. So in case there is a scenario which arises where there is a breach of independence, how should a firm deal with it? The policies and procedures of firm should cover all those aspects. So now let's look at the independence from two different perspectives. First, from maintenance of independence. So the standard says that engagement partner must provide firm with relevant information about the client. So basically, engagement partner must inform the client firm about the client, and any noting of independence threat or threat to independence in case noted, those should be informed by the partner to the firm, to the right personnel in the firm. Another important aspect from an independence perspective is that at least annually, firm should obtain independence from all the personnel in the firm. So there should be firm should be obtaining annual independence confirmation from all the personnel from the firm. Engagement partner should provide requisite details about the team, about the firm, about the client to the firm. Engagement partner should notify in case any independence threats are noted. He should help the firm and he should work together with the firm to readily check whether there are any threats noted in independence, how to comply with it, to keep the independence record updated always, and in case there is any threat which is noted, and we will see what kind of threats could be noted to independence. So in case any threat is noted or any scenario arises which could lead to a threat on independence, it is engagement partner's responsibility that he should notify the firm. Now, in case there is any breach of independence which takes place, so what should happen? In that scenario, all required people, or all people who are involved, including the people who are overlooking the independence function in the firm, should be updated about the breach of independence. Prompt communication of the identified breach should take place. So firm should also communicate any breaches noted with the engagement partners and others in the firm. And in case engagement partner has noted any breach, same should be communicated to the requisite personnel. So it says there should be two-way communication in case any breach of independence is noted. So first of all, engagement partner should ensure maintenance of independence, and in case any breach is noted or any threat is noted, prompt notification should be sent to requisite personnel. So what could be the actions which could be taken? So we spoke about the threat. What could be a threat? So I'll give you an example about a familiarity threat. Now, what is familiarity threat? So basically take an example on a particular engagement. Same senior personnel or same engagement partner has been issuing an opinion for last 7 years, last 8 years, last 10 years. So there develops a familiarity with that engagement, and therefore the familiarity threat comes into picture. So in case any threat comes into picture, there are appropriate actions which could be taken, and there is a guidance note altogether which is issued by ICAI even on independence, which deals with a lot of scenarios and the ways the firm should deal with it, or an individual personnel should deal with it. So appropriate action, what could be the appropriate action if we have to look at? So it could be elimination of that threat itself, reduce that threat to an acceptably low level. Now somebody would say how we reduce it. So say change the scope of services itself. So in case some scope of service would lead to an independence threat, change the scope of service itself or withdraw from the engagement itself. So it says eliminate the threat itself, reduce the threat to an acceptable level by changing the scope of services, or withdraw from the engagement itself. So any of these uh, actions, if taken, would help the firm to safeguard its independence. It then says that firm should at least take written confirmations annually for compliance with independence. Again, whatever size the firm should would be, written confirmation at least annually should be taken. In fact, it is encouraged to take the confirmation on every engagement, every time the reports are issued. But the SQC standard says at least annually a written confirmation should be taken. Other than that, it says to address the familiarity threat, the standard talks about partner rotation. So we were talking about a familiarity threat where a senior personnel on an assurance engagement, because of his long association with that particular engagement, develops some familiarity threat. So it says that that threat on that engagement can be reduced by having a partner rotation at least for listed clients. So currently the standard talks about rotation, which is required every 7 years. So uh, rotation is required for all listed entities of a engagement partner every 7 years, and that is just to ensure that familiarity threat is mitigated. Now somebody may wonder, what about the sole practitioner? Okay, for a sole practitioner, they are exempted from this requirement. But yes, the standard does talk about having a peer review being done every year, EQCR being followed, EQCR being done more diligently, etc. on such engagements. So sole practitioners are excluded. For a partnership firm, it is mandatory that the partner rotates from a listed client every 7 years. That's what is the requirement of the SQC standard. Now, let's look at the annual independence confirmation, since it is very, very important for a firm to have that. So now there would be a lot of questions how it should be obtained, from whom it should be obtained. So it should be obtained from all those who are required to comply with the independence requirement. So even a personnel who has resigned from an organization or who would be leaving an organization, from that person also this should be obtained. This could be obtained in a paper form. So for small firms can obtain this in a paper form and have this filed for their records. Larger firms who have more electronic modes of obtaining it can have this obtained in an electronic form. So paper or electronic, both forms are allowed, but at least annually it should be obtained. In case there are any non-compliances which are noted, or in case any persons confirms not compliance to those independence requirements, then there should be follow-up actions which should be taken on those non-compliances which are noted. Okay. So this talks about the annual independence requirements. So we have looked at two elements of SQC. One around leadership responsibilities for SQC, and second is around ethical requirement. Now let's have a look at the third element of it, which is client acceptance and continuance. So if we look at the client acceptance and continuance, so as I mentioned in the start, client relationships are of utmost importance for any firm. And therefore, this aspect is very, very important that as and when a firm accepts the client, what is the policy or a procedure which a firm should follow? So it says that before undertaking any client relationship, firm should ensure that the client doesn't lack integrity or the client has integrity. And there are various parameters which are defined in the SQC standard to assess that. So it says that whichever client is accepted, there should not be any information which makes firm believe that the client lacks integrity. Point number one. Second, it is again important that from a quality perspective, that the personnel who would be performing the engagement, or the firm has the competent personnel to perform the engagement, firm has the time and firm has the dedicated resources to do so. So take an example for a particular firm. um, they have they are trying to accept a client into an industry, say a real estate industry, which is quite complex in nature at times, and there is no person in the firm who has requisite competency to take up that engagement. The firm would not be able to take, or firm should not be taking up that engagement. So as and when firm determines to take up any engagement, there should be competent people who would be available. There should be time and resources which would be dedicated to that engagement. Only then firm should be accepting a client engagement, and firm can comply with ethical requirements. Again, ethics and independence are of paramount importance. So as and when any new client relationship is accepted, firm should be able to comply with the ethical requirement. Firm should be able to obtain all the necessary information, and in case there were any issues which were noted and which were resolved and therefore a client was accepted, firm should document the issues which were noted, how firm has resolved that. So there should be again a documentation in place to demonstrate that firm has complied with the above three aspects before accepting any new client relationship or continuing with the current client relationship. Now the question will come, how to check the integrity of the client. So the matters which can be considered for checking integrity would be a background check can be. So practically people do background check of the directors, the promoters, the related parties. They do a background check of those entities, find out the information of those charged with governance. So the standard also considers similarly. It says identity or business reputations of the owners, of the KMPs, of the related parties is extremely important. Second important aspect is what is the nature of business. So take an example, gambling company, or companies who are into different type of businesses which may not be appropriate to take up. So those nature of client operations should be dealt with appropriately before accepting those engagements. So basically riskiness, the risky nature of business also should be considered before accepting any engagement. Another important aspect is information regarding attitude of owners. Now, if the attitude of those charged with governance is aggressive towards the accounting policies, that means they try and take aggressive view when it comes to the accounting practices which they follow, or the interpretation of the accounting and auditing standards, then accounting standards basically, then such in case we believe that the attitude of owners is aggressive towards it, then the integrity cannot be demonstrated and such engagement may not be accepted. Another important aspect which should be assessed is whether the client is aggressively concerned with maintaining fees at a low level. So the effort which an auditor would put in should be compensated appropriately, and therefore client should not be very aggressive towards saying that we would always want to have lower fees, and that should again be not the case. And that is again one of the parameters which is given in the integrity considerations. Client or the those charged with governance should not put inappropriate limitation on scope of our work. So there should not be a limitation on scope of work which an auditor would perform. They should not be involved in money laundering and other criminal activities. And the most important aspect which should be evaluated is, in case the earlier auditor has resigned, his reasons for resignation and why the earlier firm was not continued in case the period would have been completed. Those reasons are again important to assess whether it is appropriate, the client has integrity, and whether it is appropriate to take an engagement. So before accepting any engagement, demonstrate whether the client has integrity, verify that, see whether the firm has capability and capacity to take it up. So it is not only about competency. At times it is also important that firm has the uh, uh, resources also to support the engagement, firm has time also to support that engagement. So subject matter experts should be there in within the firm, and then when certain complex engagements or high risk nature engagements are accepted, people should have necessary skills, people should have ability to upgrade their skills, there should be experts available, EQCR should have the requisite knowledge, and people should have the timeline or the bandwidth, I would say, to take up that work. Only then firm should accept that work. The EQCR standard, the SQC standard also talks about ethical issues. So it says that in case you are continuing with any particular engagement and at a particular point in time, there are certain issues noted because of which ethical issues noted. So there could be a scenario, and the policy and procedure should talk about withdrawal also from the engagement. So the SQC policies and procedures which are laid down by the firm, in case issues noted, there should be a process for withdrawal of engagement and from a client relationship. Before withdrawing from any engagement or a client relationship, firm should also look at the legal and professional responsibilities. All of you would be aware that there is a guidance note on resignation which is issued by ICAI. So that becomes very, very important. So when an auditor is resigning, he needs to look at the legal responsibility. In case it's a listed client, there are SEBI requirements to it. So from a profession perspective, the professional should go through the guidance note which is issued by ICAI. So all those aspects should be considered while resigning from a particular engagement. If we go to the next part of it, withdrawal from the engagement. So if we look at the withdrawal, so basically before withdrawing from an engagement, so as I mentioned that the firm should have appropriate policies and procedures in place for withdrawing from an engagement. So before withdrawing, there should be an appropriate level of discussion with the management as well as those charged with governance regarding the action that the firm might take based on facts and circumstances. So basically, in case there is any reason because of which firms believe that they need to withdraw, it should be clearly communicated with those charged with governance and appropriate level of management. Consider Firm need to also consider whether there is any professional, regulatory, or legal requirement for the firm to communicate or to remain in place, or it can withdraw. So basically, it needs to assess whether there is any requirement because of which firm needs to be in place. If yes, what should be done? What should be the next steps? Or whether there is any requirement where firm can remove, but firm needs to report. So, for example, firm needs to, in case of a listed company, from a SEBI standpoint, whether there is any need to report before a withdrawal from an engagement takes place. All such regulatory aspects should be evaluated from the firm. Firm needs to keep a documentation as and when withdrawal takes place, and these scenarios will be very, very less. This would be hardly very few scenarios practically which should occur. So basically, in case the fact that you are withdrawing from an engagement somewhere also, and if this scenario keeps on occurring, this somewhere also raises a question around the process which is followed by the firm while accepting the client. So it says the firm should have a robust process of accepting a client, so that such scenarios of withdrawal rarely occurs. So such scenarios should rarely occur where significant issues or would arise, and consultations or conclusions would be required to be done for withdrawing from an engagement. But all this needs to be documented, consulted, and kept in the files for an auditor. Next important aspect or element of SQC is around human resource. So as we spoke about human resources, so I think what is very important is, as we are working in a profession where talent retention and talent is, or the professionals are at the core of the profession. So it is all people driven industry. Human resources is very, very important. So firm needs to have policies and procedure to ensure that it has people with capacities, capability, competency, and commitment to ethical principles. It should also have policies which address the issues around recruitment, performance evaluation, capabilities, competency, career development, promotion, compensation, and estimation of personal needs. This can be achieved by training, by so as and when there is a need to enhance the competency of people, it can be achieved by training, by having suitably external persons as and when required. So we have seen that the regulatory changes are constantly keep on changing. So as and when India's came in, there was a huge change in the standards of accounting which were followed by the industry, and there was a lot of need of external experts who would have requisite knowledge of IFRS to deal with it. So as and when such scenarios arises, firm should also have suitably external persons who can train the internal resources and then can enhance their competency. So it says people should be capable, people should be competent, and they should be again committed to ethical principles. These are three key words for from a human resource policies which the firm needs to ensure. Firm also needs to ensure that the performance evaluation, compensation, or the promotion procedure, there a due recognition is given to the commitment to quality and competency, commitment to quality and ethical principles. So wherever the personnel demonstrates commitment to quality and ethical principle, those should be rewarded. Again, this aligns with the first aspect which we spoke about, leadership uh, tone of having a quality culture in the firm. So human resources policies should again demonstrate that. Now, assignment of engagement teams. So, the quality control standard also talks about how the assignment of engagement teams should take place on the engagement. So, it says that the responsibility of assignment lies with the engagement partner. So, as and when any engagement is being has to be performed, the engagement partner has to ensure that appropriate people are assigned to appropriate roles, and appropriate people who have requisite knowledge perform those role, and the engagement partner's role is clearly communicated with those charged with governance. So whatever would be the partner's role, that needs to be clearly communicated, and the firm needs to ensure that the partner has necessary capability, competency, as well as authority and time to perform that role. So it is not only about competency, but it is also about that authority and time to perform that role when accepting as an engagement partner role on any of the engagement. And the engagement partner then should designated specific responsibilities below in the team to ensure appropriate assignment of work. There should be policy and procedure in place. So SQC standard also talks about that the firm should have a procedure in place to measure the workload and availability of engagement partners. So uh, how much as an engagement partner could supervise, or what how much amount of work an engagement partner could do, that for that a firm should have a benchmark and should have a policy and procedure. So that benchmark also needs to be set by each firm to ensure that the engagement partner has sufficient bandwidth, and so that he can supervise the engagement appropriately. In case the engagement partner is not having sufficient time, he may not be able to devote that time, so that's there would be lack of supervision on the engagement. And therefore it is very very important that there should be a process and there should be a policy in place to monitor the workload of an engagement partner. Another important aspect which is very critical is assignment of appropriate staff to the engagement. So when an engagement partner would be assigning the staff to the engagement, the staff should have the experience of working on the similar type of engagement. So suppose it's a listed complex client, the staff should have that sufficient knowledge to deal with the complex issues. The staff should have that requisite knowledge, and staff should have that ability to apply that judgment. Considering its complexity, there would be areas where there would be a lot of judgment which is required. So that staff should have requisite knowledge of the judgment to be applied. As at least the senior personnel in the engagement team other than the partner should have the requisite knowledge and should have that professional skeptical mind and application of that professional judgment. For that he should have that relevant experience, is very very critical under the SQC standard, so that the quality of the engagement is not somewhere compromised. Another important element of SQC is on engagement performance. So if we look at the engagement performance, so there should be a policy. Again, the SQC standard everywhere talks about having a policy and procedure in place. So for an engagement performance, it says to ensure that the policy and procedure is in place for an engagement performance, there should be compliance with the professional standards, there should be compliance with all laws and regulations, and the report which an engagement partner is issuing in a particular circumstances, that report has to be appropriate. So the engagement performance would be judged basis the compliance with the standards as well as appropriate report being issued in the circumstances. And the policies and procedures should also include for an engagement performance and for an engagement quality. It is very important that there has to be an adequate review of the work which is done. There is adequate supervision of work. In case there are difficult matters or in case there are a lot of judgmental matters, there are consultations which are done. So consultations, we will come to the consultation process, but consultations can be done internally, consultations can be done externally. In case there are difference of opinion between the team members or there is a difference of opinion with EQCR, when we come to the EQCR aspect, we will see what is the role of an EQCR. So while performing a role of an EQCR, if EQCR comes across certain aspects and he has particular view, and there is a difference of opinion between the engagement team and EQCR or the engagement partner and EQCR, how those differences are resolved, that is also an aspect which should be covered by the policy around engagement performance. Again, then engagement quality control review and engagement documentation. For engagement documentation also, SQC requires the firm to have a policy in place. So these policies and procedures should be in place. From a consultation perspective, in case, so when should a consultation be done? So in case there is a engagement where there is a matter which is difficult or which is contentious matter, or say the matter has a lot of professional judgment being involved into it, so on those matters, uh, there should be a consultation which should be done. What should firm ensure is there should be sufficient resources who are available for consultation, and the nature and scope of consultation and how the conclusion was reached should be documented. So it says that within the firm there should be experts who should be available, um, who should be able to give conclusion to that consultation, or gives or throw certain light to make that matter more clear based on their experience. So there should be requisite personnel within the firm, requisite expert within the firm. In case the firm doesn't have an internal expert, firm can take an help of external expert. So consultation can be done internally, consultation can be done externally. It can use overall firm experience to ensure that persons consulted have all relevant facts. So the person who has been consulted should be given all the required and the relevant facts to ensure that the conclusions are appropriate. And the entire process of consultation, the nature, the scope, the matter which was consulted, the conclusions which were reached, should be clearly documented in the audit files by the engagement team. Difference of opinion, it would also help the firm to demonstrate that SQC1 has policy and procedure was there and the process has actually taken place. So consultation should be documented from that aspect as well. If we look at the differences of opinion, so in case I gave you an example, in case within the engagement team there is a difference of opinion, or between in case any consultation was raised and there is a difference of opinion between the consultation team and the engagement team, or with the EQCR, then what should be done? Then the conclusion should be documented and implemented. And till the time the conclusions are not reached, report should not be issued. So basically, it says in case there are differences of opinion which are unresolved, report should not be issued till the time it is resolved. So report should not be issued and the differences should first be resolved. And how those differences were resolved should also be documented, how it was resolved, and then only the report can be issued. Practically, you will find that these situations may be very rare, but there needs to be policy in place to address in case such situation arises. So ideally this situation practically will rarely arise, but however the standard also requires to have a policy in place for such situations, for dealing with such situations. If we look at the engagement performance or the EQCR role, now comes the EQCR role. Now who is an EQCR? So basically, and what is his role? Let's look at that. So EQCR could be any partner of a firm, or he could be a other person in the firm. But what is very important, he needs to be a member of ICAI. So he needs to be a member of ICAI to play a role of EQCR. He needs to be a qualified person. He needs to have those requisite knowledge and authority as well as experience to play a role of an EQR. So it's not only about competency and knowledge, but he should also have that authority to objectively evaluate any matter. And therefore, it is important that the person who is playing a role of an EQCR should be a partner or any person of authority in the firm who has the requisite knowledge and who can objectively evaluate that engagement. Another important aspect is now EQCR, when it should he should look at the engagement. So EQCR should look at an engagement before the report is issued. So EQCR is an extension of an engagement team, but he will objectively look at the work done by an engagement team and will give his views before the report is issued. A report should not be issued till it is cleared by an EQCR. Now another question which comes is, on what all engagement is EQCR required? So the SQC standard talks about three parameters basis which a firm can determine what all engagement and EQCR is required. So it says again, firm needs to have a policy in place to evaluate in which scenarios an EQCR is required. However, it says an EQCR review should be required for audit of financial statement of all listed companies. So in case any firm is issuing an audit opinion on the audit of a listed company, an EQCR review is required. Then it says that the firm should also set out the criteria against which all other engagement they believe an EQCR would be needed or require performance of EQR for all such engagements. So basically, firm should evaluate, and there are various criteria which are given in the EQCR standard to evaluate whether the EQCR role would be required on other engagements as well. So basically, any engagement where there is a lot of public uh, interest which is involved, even though it is not a listed company. Say, take an example of an insurance company. In case a firm is doing an audit of an insurance company where there is a public interest involved, even in those engagement, firm should determine the requirement of an EQCR. So let's look at the criteria for considering EQCR for other than listed entities. So EQCR required for all listed entities, EQCR required for all required to complete his review before the report is issued. EQCR needs to be objectively evaluating the engagement. He should have required competency. He can be an external person or an internal partner or other member of the firm who could perform those procedures or who could perform that role. So let's look at the criteria to be considered for considering EQCR for other than listed clients. So it says based on the nature of an engagement, in case there is a engagement where a lot of public interest is involved, like an insurance company, a banking engagement, there EQCR should be appointed. Identification of unusual circumstances or risks. So suppose there are certain engagements which are accepted by the firm, but the level of risk is very high. There is a risk around going concern. There are various litigations which are going around. The industry itself is very risky. In those scenarios, then EQCR should be appointed. And wherever the firm law or regulation requires an appointment of ECR, in case there is a law which requires appointment of an EQCR, then the EQCR should be appointed. So these criteria should be considered by the firm for evaluating, for formulating a policy of EQCR appointment other than listed entities. For listed entities, it is any which way is mandatory. Now let's look at the nature, timing, and extent of involvement. So basically, when it comes to the nature, timing, so timing, it has to be before the audit report is issued. The EQCR clearance has to happen before that. Now let's look at the nature and extent of the review which an EQCR would do. So basically, EQCR will not play a role of an engagement partner. He will just overview the quality of engagement. He will look at the contentious matters. He will look at the judgment exercise by the significant judgment exercise by the engagement team, and whether that seems to be appropriate, and whether the report which is issued, ultimately the report which goes to the stakeholders, is appropriate in the circumstances. So he will perform his role around those procedures, and he will not be playing a role of an engagement partner. He will not be an a person who would be day to day guiding the engagement team. That would be largely the scope of work of EQCR. So there is an illustrative list which the standard has included, which says for the EQCR for audit of financial statement, he should look at the team's evaluation of firm's independence. He should look at the significant risk which the team has identified, judgment related matters, whether consultations have been done wherever required, consultations have been appropriately dealt with, what were the misstatements which were identified, how those were disposed of, what is the communication which is gone to those charged with governance, whether appropriate working papers are prepared for the required risk conclusions risk, and whether the report is appropriate. So if you look at the entire list of the items, so these are all very critical aspects for an audit, for a quality audit to takes place. So it talks about independence, it talks about risk, talks about procedures around those risks, and how the exceptions are dealt with. All those aspects EQCR needs to overview, and he needs to also look at the communication with those charged with governance. Whenever there is a matter between the EQCR and the engagement partner which is not resolved, or there is an unresolved matter, the report should not be issued till the time the matter is resolved. So in case there is a difference of opinion between both, then the firm's difference of opinion, which we saw, the policy and procedure around it should be followed to ensure those are appropriately resolved. Let's look at criteria for EQCR appointment. So firm's policy should address the appointment of EQR and establish the eligibility. So basically an EQCR should be a person who should be technically qualified, who should be having the necessary experience and authority. He should be a person who can be consulted without his objectivity being compromised, and he should not be selected by the engagement partner. So basically EQCR should be appointed by the firm and should not be selected or should not be preferred person of an engagement partner. He should not otherwise participate in day to day activities of the firm, of the engagement, and he should not make decisions on behalf of engagement team. So his role is not to play a role of an engagement team, his role is to overview the work done by the engagement team. So he should not make decisions on their behalf, he should not be participating on day to day basis. And what would happen in case for sole practitioner, he needs to look, or he needs to contact an external qualified person to play a role of EQCR in case required. Let's look at the documentation of a review. So it says that it's not only the standard doesn't stop itself by only appointing an EQCR. It says the policy or the firm's policy should also require that what should be documented to evidence the performance of EQCR. So once the EQCR is appointed, job is done. That's not the case. As and when the EQCR does his role, the documentation should evidence that. So there should be documentation of his review. His sign off should be taken. In case of physical copies of documentation, he can sign it off physically, or in today's world where everything is digital, his review evidence or his sign off should also be taken well in advance before the reports are issued to demonstrate that EQCR was appropriately involved. So his review should be completed before report is issued, and there should be no unresolved matters before issuing a report. So these are again critical aspects about documentation. And firm should also document the completion of the audit file. So now comes one is about documentation of EQCR to evidence that EQCR has taken place. Second aspect is around documentation of an audit file. So as and when the audit engagement is done, the documentation should be completed, or the assembly of the file should be completed not more than 60 days. And the documentation should be kept confidential. Integrity of that documentation should not be tampered. The documentation should be retrievable, accessible only to limited people with limited and appropriate authority. The retention of that documentation should be of minimum 7 years, and that ownership of that documentation should be with the firm. So the standard is very clear to say that as and when documentation is completed on the engagement, it should not be tempered. So documentation is required to be completed on an engagement before the report is issued. After that, 60 days are given to an engagement team to only compile the file and not add the documentation which would which was not existing as and when the report was issued. So it is only assembly of file which can be done, but the evidence collection, etc., gathering, all should be done before the report is issued. And therefore it is very important that since that window is available after the report is issued, the access of that documentation should be restricted to very few people, and there should be a policy in place to say how who would be able to access that documentation. He should document what all changes were done to that, so that accessibility should be limited, that retrievability should be limited to few people, and that integrity and confidentiality of documentation, especially the integrity of documentation, should be intact before after the report is issued, and it should not be substantially changed. And the retention has to be for minimum 7 years. Another important aspect of SQC is around monitoring. So if we look at the monitoring, it says the policies and procedures for obtaining. Now, what is monitoring? Monitoring is basically inspection of the entire quality control system, as well as monitoring of the audit, which is, or the engagements which is performed. So monitoring again is very, very important aspect. It says there should be policies and procedures, that the SQC policies are relevant and they are operating effectively. So one is having the policies and procedures in place, and the second aspect is people practicing it. So there should be policies in place, those should be relevant, adequate, and people should be complying with those policies. Now, how will you check whether they are complying or not? So it says to check whether they are complying or not, there should be periodic inspection of completed engagements. So as and when engagements are completed, there should be periodic inspection to evaluate whether those engagements are meeting the firm's quality control requirements. That is very, very critical. Another important aspect is responsibility of monitoring is on partners and other persons with sufficient knowledge. So it says monitoring has to be done by the partners as well as people with sufficient knowledge. There should be people who should be designated with that responsibility, and results should be communicated to the managing partner or the CEO and other appropriate individuals at least annually. So at least this inspection or this evaluation should take place annually, and results should be communicated. So monitoring is a very, very important aspect. So it talks about inspection of completed engagement. It says that at least one engagement for every partner should be inspected, and it should not be ordinarily exceed 3 years. So in case of large firms where there are large number of partners, at least once in a 3 years, a partner's engagement should be inspected on a cyclical basis, and the results of the inspection should be communicated to the managing partner of the firm. And the inspection cycle should be organized basis the size of the firm, how large it is, wherever, what are the complexity of the firm's practice, what type of clientele does it caters to, what is the risk of those clientele. Considering all those aspects, the inspection should be organized. The small practitioners, now again the question comes, what about the smaller firms? So smaller firms and sole practitioners should use suitably qualified person or other firms to carry out the inspection. So in case they don't have anybody in house who can do that objectively, they need to have another firm or another external person to do that inspection process, and that should be objectively carried out. Okay. So what happens? One is monitoring. Monitoring is mandatory. There are various ways given to monitor. The most important aspect is inspection of the engagement for files on a cyclical basis. Now, what happens after the inspections are concluded? Now, there could be certain deficiencies which may be noted based on that inspection. Now, there could be two types of deficiencies. One could be instances that do not necessarily indicate that there is an issue or with the SQC, or the SQC is insufficient, or there could be issues which are systematic, repetitive, or significant deficiencies which requires corrective actions. So one is there is a some deficiency in one engagement, has nothing to do with the SQC process is there, the engagement team has faltered on certain aspects. Another is there are certain observation which is across the firm, which are more systematic and repetitive in nature. What should be done to take corrective action? So it says it should communicate the relevant deficiencies to the relevant engagement partner and other relevant people in the firm, and along with the recommendations for remedial action. So there should be a quick communication to the engagement partner and relevant people on the engagement, and so that they can take recommendations, or they can do they can take the necessary remedial actions. So now recommendation could result in different aspects. So recommendation could result in taking appropriate remedial action in respect to a particular engagement or people, communication of findings to those responsible for training and professional, changes to SQC or disciplinary action for repeated non-compliance cases. So in case there is an observation which is specific to a particular engagement, then the communication would be to that particular engagement team along with the training team, where the training team can send the messages to public at large as part of their training curriculum to say those deficiencies or those aspects or those mistakes could be avoided on the future engagements. In case there are repetitive matters, and there is some flaw or there are some loopholes in the firm's SQC procedures, those needs to be immediately plugged in, or remedial action needs to be taken. In case there is any action which is, or there are any situations which are noted, or certain deficiencies which are very repetitive in nature, or which are very grave, then disciplinary action for those repeated non compliances needs to be taken. At least annually, firm should communicate the results of monitoring of its system quality control to engagement partners and other persons. So at least your annual communication has to take place for those matters. That is very, very critical. Now, what happens about complaints and allegations? So again, the monitoring process says that the firm should have a process around looking at the complaints and allegations also. So in case the complaints and allegations that the work performed fails to comply with the professional standard, an allegation of non-compliance with SQC, then to ensure compliance, so in case the firm has a procedure, it should appropriately deal with those complaints. So in case there is a complaint around the non-compliance of standards or SQC, firm should have a process to deal with it. Again, firm should clearly have defined channel for people to raise the concerns. So it is very important that people could raise their voice or concerns in case appropriate compliances are not followed. So firm should have an appropriate channel. So like companies or our clients have whistleblower system. Similarly, it says firm should have defined channels where people could raise their concerns, and then those could be investigated in detail in accordance with the firm's policies and procedures. So this is around complaints and allegations. So with this, we have covered the 6 important elements of SQC. Now what we will focus on is around the documentation aspect. So it says again, one is having policies and procedures in place, but in today's times where regulatory focus is lot on the audit quality, documentation again is of paramount importance. I think we have been talking this for a really long time, that if it is not documented, it is not done. So it says that establish policies and procedures around each element of SQC documentation. So for SQC also, there has to be a documentation which a firm should be able to demonstrate that SQC policies are there and those have been followed. Large firms can obviously use electronic databases. Smaller firm can use more simpler and informal method like checklist, forms, etc. Again, what type of documentation to follow, what type of content it should have, it all depends upon the size of the firm, the degree of authority of the personnel, number of offices which are there, the client profile, nature and complexity of the practice. That is again very important. Based on that, firm can decide what form of documentation they need to maintain to demonstrate the or to evidence the SQC compliances. The firm should retain this documentation for a period of time which is sufficient to permit those performing monitoring procedures. So in case tomorrow there is a monitoring which takes place, firm should have those documentation ready, and it should be restored by the firm, or it should be maintained by the firm, retained by the firm. That is very, very important. So what are the key takeaways for the audit firms? Let's look at this. So we discussed about the entire SQC1 standard which is there. We discussed about the role of EQCR which is there. The key takeaway for the audit firm is improve the implementation and documentation. First of all, it is very important to go back and see whether you have a formal implementation of SQC1 in your organization, in your firm. It is very important. Even if you are a sole practitioner, we saw that there is no exemption which the standard has given, other than barring one or two places where sole practitioners are not required to rotate on the engagements. There is no other exemption which is given. So it is very important that please go back and ensure that you go back and relook at SQC1 requirements, have SQC1 implemented in your firms, have documentation of various elements of SQC implemented in your firm. So it is not only having SQC implemented, have those policies and procedures being implemented, have an evidence of those policies and procedures being implemented as well, documented in your firm. Maintain those policies and procedures, notify the breach of independence. So in case of independence, it is of utmost importance. In case the firm notes any breach of independence, have a detailed documentation around it, maintain that documentation, what was the breach, how it was noted, how it was resolved, the manner in which it was resolved, the course of action which the firm had undertaken to resolve that. All those aspects are very, very important to ensure that SQC1 is evidenced. Provide eligibility and maintain the objectivity of EQCR. Now, EQCR, what happens is at times is an internal partner who is assigned on that role. It is very, very important that the role of EQCR is played objectively, because the entire concept of EQCR is to enhance the engagement quality, to ensure that appropriate judgments are undertaken by the engagement team on the engagement. So it is very important that EQCR has competency, has time, and can has an authority and can objectively play his role of acting as an EQCR on the engagement. So EQCR should be eligible and should be objectively playing the role. Maintain the staff appraisal policy. Again, human resources is the crux. Maintain the staff appraisal policy. Ensure that the culture in the organization, promote a quality culture in the organization. Reward high quality work which is being performed. Have appraisal policies in place where ethics and quality are given paramount importance. Again, that is very, very important. Maintain policies and procedures with respect to engagement performance, engagement documentation, and archival process. So basically, we saw that the engagement team generally gets 60 days to assemble the file. However, all the evidence has to be obtained before the report is signed, and the integrity of the firm should not be compromised. So it is very important that firm has a policy and procedure around the engagement performance, around the engagement documentation, what can be altered after report signing, what cannot be, what is the archival process, what should be the process followed, who has access to those files, who can retrieve it. All that needs to be documented. Very limited access should be given for the accessibility of the files once the report is signed and before the archival takes place, to ensure that the integrity of documentation is maintained. We have seen in lot of reviews which have, and the NFRA reports which have recently come up, where there is lot of discussion around the engagement documentation and archival process. Again, there has been a lot of discussion around the independence of the firm, the independence of the team. So I think it again takes us back to the SQC1, which requires us to maintain the policies and procedures and follow those policies and procedures for the engagement performance, engagement documentation, and archival process. We also need to improve the monitoring mechanism and take corrective actions for the deficiencies noted during inspection process. So basically, again, another important and critical aspect or element of SQC is monitoring. So whenever there is a monitoring which takes place, and it says it should at least takes place annually. So whenever that annual activity takes place and whatever corrective actions are taken, there should be a detailed noting of the findings of those monitoring activity, the root cause analysis, the corrective actions for any deficiencies which were noted during inspection process. All those should be noted, and all those should be considered by the firm and documented. All those should be act as a messages and should be further communicated to the practice at large through trainings to say these were the findings of the inspection which needs to be taken care of or which needs to be avoided on future engagements. That is very, very critical. Only then the quality of audit will go up. Now we spoke a lot about SQC1 and what does it talk about? What is the role of EQCR? Now let's look at the future of quality control. So, in case if you would be aware, globally the SQC is known as ISQC, which is International Standard on Quality Control. Soon this standard will replace and a new standard is likely to be implemented, which is called as ISQM. So this is a quality control framework. Again, an international standard on quality management is what ISQM stands for. So what will happen is ISQC1, which and in India we call it as SQC1, and there are certain differences between ISQC and SQC, but it's more or less the similar standard. So this ISQC is likely to be replaced with three standards and it would be ISQM. So currently it is only one standard, which is SQC1, which would be replaced with ISQM1, ISQM2, and there is a revised ISA 220. So basically today we have an auditing standard on 220, which is on again on quality on audit engagements. That is also revised globally. Now globally there is work going on around this since 2019, 2020, and these are more likely to be effective from December 15, 2022. Now this is global applicability of these standards. In India, um, again, soon institute obviously will relook into it and come up with the I would say a new standard altogether, though it will take few years to reach there, but it's not very far off since this standard will become applicable globally. Today I will just give you a very brief synopsis of the standard, and this I will tell you these standards are very, very different from this standard on quality control which we spoke about. So these are much more stringent and the requirements have been further uh, made very, very stringent. So if I have to very simply put it, the current standard is more of a I would say more of a standard with policies and procedures. It is more of a reactive standard, whereas the ISQM standard, which is will be applicable globally soon, is more of a proactive standard, and it requires firm to have a risk assessment to be done to identify and prevent the problems from occurring. So as we talk about our clients, that about the internal financial control system in place, similarly the ISQM standard expects the firm to have an internal control framework in place, and it also requires firm to test all those controls to say whether those controls are operating effectively or not. Now we can see that the way the clients or the businesses has to used to have the ICFR or the internal financial control framework, and they need to test to demonstrate that the framework is operating, and the auditor used to test it separately. Similar approach will be followed by ISQM, where it would be more of proactive, more of risk-based standard, which will help to identify and prevent the problems from occurring. And then the firm will need to have an entire system of quality control management around it. So there would be controls identified. Firm will need to have the testing of controls to ensure that the quality control framework is operating effectively around the framework which is designed by the firm. So again, there are three. It would be basically two standards, and the current auditing standard would be revised. Current standard is more of a reactive standard requiring firm to act when a problem is identified. The revised standard is very, very proactive, and it requires the firm to have a risk assessment to identify and the prevent firms from occurring. So there has to be an entire risk assessment system in place to identify the issues which are there in the firm and to address those issues from occurring. Again, there are more elements to the ISQM standard, which is likely to be effective globally. This process also results in the firm having a SOQM, they call it, system of quality management. So every firm will require to have a system of quality management in place. If we just have to have a glimpse about how was ISQC1 and how is ISQM1 placed and what is about ISQM2, we can just see the snapshot. So ISQC1 had the 6 elements which we spoke about: leadership, ethical requirements, client acceptance and continuance, engagement performance, human resources, and monitoring. These were 6 critical aspects of ISQC1. Now, when it comes to ISQM, there are 8 critical aspects, which talks again about governance and leadership. Risk assessment process has been given lot of importance here. Ethics, as it is very important, still finds its place in ISQM1. Acceptance and continuous engagement, performance, human resources, monitoring all remain same. There are 2 added parameters around risk assessment process and information and communication. Again, information and communication has given a lot of importance and has been added as one of the elements of ISQM1. ISQM2 is all dedicated to engagement quality reviews. So there is a separate standard which was earlier as part of ISQC1, which used to talk about the engagement quality review role, reviewer's role, and inspection used to talk about the monitoring. The monitoring used to talk about inspection of engagements. So ISQM2 is a separate standard which talks about engagement quality reviews. So the framework is enlarged. The standards requirement would be huge. Firms would need to do lot of investment, and a lot of global firms have started way back in 2021 investing in making them future ready for the implementation of ISQM1, because ISQM1 will become effective from 15th December 22, and then the monitoring aspect would start from 23 onwards. So it is very important that the firm are ready by 22 with having a risk assessment etc process in place for the implementation of ISQM standard. And this brings us to the end of the session on the ISQC1 and the role of EQCR. Hope you would have found the session to be useful, and we can discuss in case there are any questions.
Much, ma'am. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for a wonderful deliberation. And I have received certain questions. If you allow, can I ask certain questions of the members,
Yeah,
ma'am?
yeah, sure, sure.
Ma'am, first question is EQCR not necessary for the corporate houses having huge setup of internal audit team? Most quality issues arises in the corporate, as we know.
So basically, the EQCR role or the EQCR role is defined in SQC1. Now, SQC1 is a standard which is applicable. If we go back to the slide and look at the applicability, it is applicable to the audit or review of financial statements and performance of other assurance related engagements. So wherever an
Yes.
assurance related reports are issued, the role of EQCR comes into picture. So it would not be applicable to corporate houses, but it would be applicable to the professionals, to the chartered accountant firms who would be undertaking to certify the audit and other assurance related services.
Yes. Ma'am, in case audit, juniors have sufficient reason to prove EQCR had tempered the audit documents in corporate house. What is the remedy?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
In case audit, juniors have sufficient reason to prove EQCR had tempered the audit documents in corporate house. What is the remedy available?
So in case the audit team believes that EQCR has tempered the audit documentation, is what you are
Hmm.
saying, right? So basically,
Yes.
see, the role of EQCR is to review the overall engagement. Okay, EQCR is not part of an engagement team who would do an audit documentation. So in case the engagement team believes that EQCR has tampered the audit documentation, I think they can raise it with the relevant personnel within the firm and get it resolved, because it is an issue which within the firm should be resolved rather than I think discussing about it. It is important that it is discussed with engagement partner, EQCR, and relevant personnel within the firm,
Yes. Yes.
because
Yes.
ideally EQCR will not temper the documentation. He will give his views on, he will give his views on the professional matters or professional judgment which the team has exercised.
Ma'am, is there a specific amount of time that EQCR needs to book on an assignment as evidence of review?
So basically, see, every firm has their own quality control processes where a particular set of time is dedicated to EQCR. Every firm have their own policies to follow it. Generally, on the since EQCR comes only on riskier engagement, at least 2.5 to 3% of the entire engagement time is expected to be booked by EQCR. There is no parameter which is given in the SQC standard, but firm within its policies and procedures should have that defined, and generally between 2.5 to 4% something should be considered reasonable. Again, it is basis the risk of the engagement and basis the policy which the firm has defined. This should be forming part of firm's policy.
Ma'am, who will guide us to implement SQC in an organization, and what are the requirements we have to follow for the implementation?
So, for guiding the implementation of SQC, I think the if you go through the standard is very clear on the expectation which from the firm. So ICAI is the way the standard has been drafted, and there is again a guidance also which is issued by ICAI on this entire aspect. I think that will help you to have the process or to have a quality control framework in place. Obviously, external help can be sought from the people, from the external experts who overlook such functions in different organizations or different firms. That help is always available, but in case you want to do it on your own, the guidance note and the standard on SQC will definitely is elaborative to tell you what all is expected. External help can be always seek from the experts.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes. One last question. How long we have to keep the documentation and scenes to appear for more than that of the peer review?
So basically, the standard currently talks about 7 years documentation should be retained by an engagement team for the review. As a policy, at least minimum 7 years it should be retained is what is written in the current standard.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much, ma'am, for a wonderful deliberation. And on behalf of WSB of ICI, I extend my heartiest thanks towards you for sparing your valuable time and enlightening all of us on SQC1 and EQCR. And once again, thank you for even after having the not good health, you have committed and you have justified with your presentation and detailed presentation, ma'am. Hats off to you. Thank you so much for sparing your time, even after having the bad health, madam. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you
No
so much.
problem, sir. My pleasure. I would like to thank the entire team of ASB for giving me this opportunity to have a deliberation on this important topic of SQC1 and role of EQCR. I think there is one chat which I could see where there is somebody from a firm from KNAV who would want to prefer to have a discussion around the ISQM1 part, which I spoke the later about, and whether there is any roadmap for ISQM in India. I think my contact details, if somebody would want to note, I had disclosed them on the last slide. So please contact me. We can have a detailed deliberation. But what I can tell you is, as of now, the framework or the guidelines are not very clear when it would come into India, but it would sooner be applicable. Globally, it is applicable from 15 December, and it's not expected, the timeline is not expected to move further. So once I think it gets implemented, soon institute will take actions or take steps in those lines, and we can have a detailed deliberation around ISQM1 coming to India as well.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.